Well, I'm solo today. My partner is out doing a field study. She's going up and down California, doing field research with a professor by the name of Steve Gleesman, who's currently working at UC Santa Cruz to develop agroecology, permaculture. So they're looking at what's going on throughout California. And Sara was in charge of our PowerPoint, so that explains the field what one on field research does. It gets to the basic points. So the concrete garden project. So, as all of you know, is that good? Yeah. As all of you know, technology is meaningless if it's not connected with the lived realities of the people who are going to be applying that to the context in which they're using these technologies. In the case of Mexico City and the production of agriculture in Mexico City, the technology has historically been applied in a way that has undermined the ability of people within the city center to actually feed themselves and to develop sustainable, small-scale agriculture. So what the Concrete Garden Project works with is that in response to this system, in the creation of what are known as food deserts in urban centers, that is to say, areas in which low-income people have no other option other than high foods that are processed foods, high carbs, and this is something that we as well in the United States are facing in our urban centers. So in response to this, people have developed small-scale community gardens and rooftop gardens. Now, the key disconnect between this model, which has developed out of people's need to survive, and being applied on a structural scale, which would really address the issue of food insecurity, is the fact that these gardens are currently not connected to the institutions which would have the networks and the information resources to disseminate this information. So what the Concrete Garden Project focuses on is working with communities, is working with this is what the partner's for. Thank you. Great, thank you. Is working to support the work of organizations that are currently working within Mexico City, so that they can develop, that the movement can expand. So the way in which the Concrete Garden Project does this is through the creation of an intra-organizational web portal using open source software. Open source software, for those of you that don't know, is software in which the code is accessible. That is to say, there's no information or intellectual property rights on that. So that allows organizations that would otherwise not be able to afford a $600, $800 program or web application to be able to do that for free. So the Concrete Garden Project is going to be a site within Mexico City that does hands-on trainings with partners to develop a web portal that will then serve as the nucleus for collecting information on what is currently happening in Mexico City and the emerging research surrounding the development of urban agroecology. So the center is important because the open exchange of information and ideas between academic institutions, international development institutions, really has not, isn't happening. From everyone that we spoke to that's currently working in Mexico City, you see a huge disconnect between very well-funded institutions and the people who are actually dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis. So what the project will be is both a site for experimentation and application of urban agroecology methods, and also a place for people who are working, members of environmental organizations, to come learn open source technology and participate in the development of an intra-organizational web, which will act as the center for communication, skills share, resource share. And the reason that this project is so innovative and is so important is that traditionally, the traditional logic behind development is that you go to the rural centers and that develop the rural outlying areas so that people then do not migrate to the urban centers. But there's already so many people that are living in these urban centers that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis that what needs to happen is that the logic needs to switch and look at what are people doing now, and what resources are they working with, and work to support that. So the long-term goal of this project is to connect the research and the solutions that people are coming up with in Mexico City, low-income people in Mexico City, environmental organizations in Mexico City, with to be able to collect that in a way that can inform international policy, that can and that can also come in conversation with some of that same research which is going on currently in California, in the United States, in places like South Central farmers in LA. So thank you very much. Take it open to questions.
Since both you and your collaborator are graduating this year, I'm wondering if you thought about how you can recruit some UC Santa Cruz students, assuming that this initial phase of the project is successful, to maintain the project after you leave.
That's a great question. I currently am a coordinating fellow for a program at UC Santa Cruz called the Global Information Internship Program. And we have a whole network of UCSC students that is working on open source database development, and we work with Linux a lot. And so we have every quarter about 40 students, and it's growing every year. And so that's a whole network of students who are learning the cutting-edge technologies and who are also looking at those cutting-edge technologies in light of the emerging crises and looking at it on a global context of what is happening in the developing world, what's happening in the developed world, and how can we work together to create a world that is more sustainable. So that's where the connection would be. So our long-term plan is that this center would serve as a place where students who are at the top of their fields at UC Santa Cruz and other institutions in the UC could come and could learn from people who are working specifically in Mexico City on this, and have an exchange of ideas between the two groups.
About web access for poor people in Mexico City itself, what's your sense of what people who need this information having access?
Yeah.
What's your sense of that?
That's a great question. What there is currently is there's a lot of internet cafes in the area. So what that means is that people have had exposure to web technologies. They know how to use things like chat, models like Friendster, and people have used it as a communication tool primarily to communicate, with people all over the world. But there's not, the expense is nominal to use an internet cafe. However, there's not the training to use, we all have gotten lost on the internet, I'm sure, before. If you don't know where a certain valuable information knows, it can be very daunting. And so currently there's a huge need for hands-on workshop trainings like the Concrete Garden Project to really streamline that information. And so there is access, but there's a disconnect between the kind of access that people have and the training.
What are social programs like in Mexico City? I mean, I've been to Mexico City a few times, and it seems to me that there are social programs that are available for the poor, and maybe this might be a good option to add to a social program's repertoire of things that they have available that they might be able to suggest to the individuals they target. So if you have sort of an urban high-risk person, maybe they can suggest, here's a set of things you can get, and I'll be a resource to get them for you.
Yeah.
Like progressive is one.
Yeah,
that's the other question.
Yeah, and that's the idea behind this model, is that we're not so arrogant or ignorant to assume that we are going to come in as outsiders and say that we have the solutions to these. We do have some tools and we're going to support. So there is definitely a network of services, specifically with urban agroecology. The resources that there are at UNAM, and we're working with several other professors there. But it has been, like I said, those are resources that are somewhat isolated in those institutional centers. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up is